So I read that growing up, you were a keen footballer.
Footballer as in soccer?
Yeah. Is that right or no?
Did you read that?
I think your Wikipedia page that you wanted to be a footballer, it said. Maybe
I know
someone edited it.
like I was never any good, as in I was never going to make it professional. But at one stage in probably going from 13, 14 years of age, I did kind of lose interest in rugby quite a bit. Preferred just kicking around the football and around the school in the backyard and stuff like that. So um, yeah, and at the school I went to in RBAI in Belfast, they don't play soccer until, I call it soccer here now. Living in America too long, you have to call it soccer, but they don't play it until 16. So you never really got the chance to play it early on. But yeah, I enjoyed kicking it around, but I just kind of fell out of love a little bit with rugby around that age, and then a couple of the coaches and including my parents pulled me aside and said, "Listen, catch yourself on. You're never going to become like or go anywhere far in football. So focus on the rugby." And that's what it did. Change my mind about a year later, and then it all was kind of straightforward from there.
Why did you lose interest in it?
I don't know. I don't know. There were. I mean, it was. I've literally no idea. I mean, it seems so far away now, though, in the past, but I just didn't really have much interest at that time. I just preferred kicking around a football. No more to it than that. You know, at 13, 14 years of age, the thought of becoming professional wasn't even entered your mind at that stage. So it was just purely a fun kind of thing. I just didn't enjoy it as much, to be honest. Grew up obviously kind of playing mini rugby and everything. Had a pretty you know, my family's very much heavily involved in rugby, so that was always what I was gonna, you know, at least start off playing. And it was all going great and everything, but just got to that age and I was kind of like, oh, you know, enjoyed kicking around a football or a bit more than kind of playing rugby. So I don't know if there's any particular reason, but it's funny. My dad at the time, he was he said, okay, well, fair enough. Okay, if you wanna go and try football, we'll go down to this local team or whatever, and they're doing like regional trials or whatever, and let's see how you fare against other kids your age who've been playing football 7 days a week since they were kind of 5 years old. Yeah, and I pretty soon realized that I wasn't much good, so you turned and went straight back to rugby.
Yeah. And then, so when you're in RBAI, do you get pretty serious then, like playing schools rugby when you're kind of 15, 16, 17?
Yeah, it was much like probably you would imagine most of the kind of schools are, the top schools around Ireland, particularly kind of Dublin. A lot of those schools are now. It's almost like a full-on kind of gig. And once you get to kind of past, I know in Ulster it's called Medallion Shield, it's junior rugby in down south. Once you get beyond that and get into kind of senior rugby, it starts to get pretty serious and pretty much takes up your whole week. So whether it be 3 times a week or 4 times a week in the afternoon training as a squad or as a forward pack, and then maybe lunchtime 2 or 3 times a week doing lineouts, circuits, and all that. Yeah, pretty much takes a heavy toll on things. So yeah, it's tough to balance that and doing all the work and studying and then trying to have any sort of social life at all and trying to have any energy at all as well is tough, but it gets pretty full on pretty fast.
Was it around then when you were kind of like, as you say, training full on, like I know this, like, but that you wanted to kind of go further in the game or like go professional, play with Ulster?
At that stage, no, not at. It wasn't until honestly, I think 17 years old, whenever I was lower sixth going into upper sixth, and then you kind of you're on the you're talking about like going to Irish schools and things like that. And then back then it was kind of around 2000, and it was a different academy setup that I had back then. It wasn't done through the provinces. It was done through nationally through Dublin. So they used to pick, I think, around a dozen players each year who would go into like a national academy. And what that was pretty much 3 to 4 weeks during the summer of pretty intense training. And then you go back to your province and literally train once a week. It was a bit, yeah, it was very almost like a bit of amateur kind of ethos about it. But it wasn't until I got invited to that was basically the pathway to go on professional. And that was kind of 17, 18 years of age. And in all honesty, at that stage as well, I thought myself lucky to be invited into that because I was, I had the likes of, I was playing back row artist schools with Dennis Leamy and Shane Jennings, who were, I would quite happily say, pretty far ahead of me at that stage, and so to get invited into that was great. But it was an opportunity which I knew was going to then hopefully lead it into going into professional. And so, yeah, full steam ahead from there. And it meant you had to stay within Ireland to study once you left school. So my original plan was to go over to England. It was going to be either Loughborough University or I think it was Newcastle or Loughborough, something like that. And just because that's pretty much what a lot of the guys from Ulster do. Whatever they finish school, they go over to England or Scotland or whatever. But obviously that didn't. It wasn't going to work if you're going to stay in the national academy. You had to stay within Ireland. So then I decided to go down and play in Trinity College and play down there for a couple of years. So that was the path it took. So yeah, to answer your question, it's probably around 17 years of age where I thought it was actually going to be something that you could do for a living.
Yeah, and why then did you head down to Trinity? Like you had to stay within Ireland, but at the time, was it there like Division 3 or like quite lower down in the AIL like that? You didn't mind that, did you?
No, and even the first year at Trinity, I didn't even play the senior team. I played under 20s, and they were pretty competitive. Number one, I didn't want to stay at home. I don't think my parents wanted me to stay at home either. Like they just wanted to get rid of me. But so it was. I wanted to go somewhere different. Yeah, I mean, listen, you could have played. You could have stayed at home and played Ballymena or Dungannon or something like that. But I still think at that age, I was still very underdeveloped, and it was more about kind of pursuing an academic life. The chance to study at Trinity College is there's not that many people get to do that. So they gave me a chance to do that with a scholarship as well. And yeah, it was kind of balancing the two. I know they were kind of third division at the time, but they had a good coach, Tony Smeeth, who I think he's still there. I'm not sure. Maybe he still is there. He's been there a long time. So. But they had a good setup. So it was the decision that I made at the time was kind of a mix between the whole academic and the whole rugby side of it.
Yeah. And how was it like you're in the academy and you're kind of in that setup and then you go to Trinity and you weren't making the first team? And I know you're only young and stuff, but how was that? Did you kind of think you would be getting into it, or was that a bit of a setback playing with the 20s?
Yeah, I mean, I went down with a guy, Matt McCulloch, he went on to play second row for Ireland. So he was my age group in school. He went straight into the first team, and I didn't. There was a guy, I forget his name now, but he was playing number 8 for the first team. So I didn't break into the first team at the time. I wasn't too fussed, I knew I had weight to put on. I knew I had parts of the game to develop. So it was a no major rush, I was 18, 19 years of age. And then my second year, then going into second year Trinity, then broke into the first team straight away, pretty much. And then that year, I think I got player of the season for them as well. So I was kind of 19, 20 years of age. And that was kind of the year that really things sort of took off quite a bit. At the end of that season, Alan Solomons became, actually, I think at the start of that season, Alan Solomons became director of rugby at Ulster. And, they were obviously trying to get as many guys back home who'd been playing abroad as possible, so they said, it was Alan Clark, actually, who was involved in the academy at the time. He said to me, why don't you come back and change your university degree back to Queen's, and then we can get you involved in the Ulster setup. Slightly fortuitous, because there was a guy called Robbie Brink who's playing number 8 for Ulster. He got a career-ending injury and they just, that was, I think, first or second game into the season or whatever, or during pre-season maybe it might have been. So I got a very late call there saying, listen, would you like to come back, and we'll give you like a full-time contract, so you can bypass the academy, and we'll give you a full-time contract. And at sort of 19, 20 years of age, I think it's 20 years of age, to be offered a full-time contract and also to be able to study at the same time, it was a bit of a no-brainer kind of thing. It was like, okay, yeah, listen, where do we sign? Obviously money back then wasn't huge. Probably still isn't great in terms of academy these days, but it was just the opportunity to try and get involved in a professional team. So a little bit of luck was obviously a part of it, but at 20 years of age, then signed full-time contract with Ulster, and then did changed my university degree up to Queen's. So did that very, very slowly, part-time. Funny, like the first year that I was there, we ended up doing a field trip to Magaluf for the course that I was on. So you imagine trying to tell your head coach that you're 3 or 4 months into your first professional contract. I'm going to piss off here to Magaluf for a week. Like,
what kind of field trip was that?
I don't know. It was. So I studied geography and economics. It was. I don't know. I don't know exactly if we learned a whole pile that week, apart from trying to survive on pot noodles with students.
Yeah, nice one. And so like at 18, then when you're going down to Trinity, was there anything there in Ulster? Like you weren't kept on? Was there an academy? You weren't kept on, or Ulster weren't like, hey, we want you hanging around Belfast training? And you said the academy was centralized, but was it kind of you were stepping away from Ulster at that point, and you were going off to Trinity? And
yeah, there was no real. It was all like as I say, like a national centralized academy system back then, so it didn't really matter where you went. And at that age, at that stage, that was probably around 2000, 20 years ago, 22 years ago, around 2000, where there wasn't a great, the game's changed a lot, where they're probably now keeping an eye on guys who are sort of 15, 16 years of age. There was no major rush to get people involved. It was still a very kind of young amateur game back then, or early in professional days. So no, there was no pressure from Ulster to get me to stay there. Definitely not. So yeah, that was, and I don't think as well, I think the fact that they're always pretty keen for you to try and do some studying in the part-time, alongside it. The fact that you get to go down to Trinity and do that is fine. But I guess the long-term view from them was like, yeah, we'd like to get them back eventually, but I don't think there's any pushback initially.
Yeah, right. And pretty cool as well, or fair play with when you weren't making the senior team in Trinity, but like focusing on what you need to get better at and what you need to improve on as a player. And then within a year, you're signing a professional deal with Ulster, versus I know a lot of players can have the victim mentality. It's like, oh, I'm not here, I'm not there, I should be this or that or the other.
Yeah. Well, I was like, I was definitely very driven anyway. It's very easy to go away to university or college or whatever and kind of, live the college life and, do that and try and get through your degree and everything and have a social life. I find it very hard to balance those three things: having a social life, trying to be as professional as possible with rugby, and also trying to do the studying as well, particularly at a kind of a big university like that. My one thing, I was definitely very motivated to become professional, so I was, there's people going out sort of 3-4 nights a week in college, and I was kind of a bit dull in that way, that I would go out after the games and have a big blowout then, but during the week I was pretty focused on doing what I had to do to kind of get better as a rugby player, whether that just be, all the gym stuff that you do or whatever else. And then same applied to whenever I came back and actually did sign with Ulster. So again, I wouldn't have gone out a whole pile, I wouldn't have done a lot of partying. I was very focused on just, getting involved and starting playing first team rugby with Ulster. So that was probably a period of 2 years from about 18, 19 to 2021, where it was just very much focused on doing that. And I think it was just making sacrifices, really. It's something that's very hard to balance. To try and do all three of those is a very difficult thing to do. So I just put it down to that, is that any opportunity I had to try and get noticed to get back into Ulster or to get into any kind of setup was I would have taken that, definitely.
Nice one. And then how did you find it when you did get into that Ulster setup, like at 2021? Like, how was that going in with all the full-time pros?
I mean, listen, at the start it was tough. I came in. I think it was actually came in late into the preseason, so and obviously they're professional, so they got a better kind of they're ahead of you anyway in terms of their physique and their physical attributes and skill attributes and mentality and all that. But I came in towards the middle to end of preseason. It was a bit of a wake-up call, especially that first couple of weeks. But after that, it was grand. It's, you obviously kind of look up to a lot of the players, and you sit back and a lot of these guys, you're the ones who you kind of idolize quite a bit. But whenever you got the opportunity to go full on in training, or to actually, play a preseason game or whatever it was, then you just had to take it, So it was good. I just think it's just about taking the opportunity, and not, if you do get that opportunity to play a game, preseason game, or go full on in training, you can't be nice. You got to get stuck into them, even though they're guys you probably respect and have watched on TV, for the last number of years. You just got to, because I think sometimes, as an older player, whenever it's playing for Ulster, you get these academy guys who get stuck into you, and half of you's like, would you just piss off? Like, for fuck's sake, like, calm down. It's Monday or Tuesday, But at the end of the day, you got to look at it from their eyes. That's how they get noticed, and that's how the coach notices them. They want to see that they got something in them. So you can understand why they do that, because there's not many opportunities you do get. You might only get a few opportunities, and if you mess those up, then you'll just be kind of sent off somewhere else.
Yeah, 100%. And were there more like full on back then when you were starting out? Like, training was a pretty full metal jacket at times.
Yeah, it was different. It was full on. Obviously, it was probably more like bone on bone training back then, definitely. But also the training sessions were way longer. We used to have maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours of training, followed by 1 full hour of fitness. So sometimes
Wow.
we'd be there for 2.5 to 3 hours, which is unbelievable. And I think in my early days at Ulster, we became probably the fittest team in the league, but not particularly physical, because we lost so much damn weight from all the training, all the aerobic training we did. There wasn't as much science behind it. You don't have all the kind of GPS and all the the collision stats and everything like you have nowadays. So a lot of it was more old school, definitely.
Yeah. And why did you decide then to head off to Northampton after a couple of years?
Well, I got, so I'd done, I think I headed off when I was about 27, I think. I'd done probably 5 years at Ulster. I signed, after my first year, I signed a 4-year. My breakthrough season, I actually got player of the season, and it was great. And they gave me a 4-year contract. And at that stage, I'm kind of still only 22 years old, and the novelty of professional rugby's, it's still pretty raw, and it's great. So they give me a 4-year contract, and I'm like, okay, yeah, where to sign? Loving this life and everything. But very soon after that, within a year or two, Ulster starts doing pretty badly as a team, and we start struggling, and I think we lost something like 13, 14 games on the trot, finished now down near the bottom of the table, and it all wasn't as kind of rosy as it was that first season. So that was the time whenever there was Mark McCall was the head coach, obviously got on to do great things at Sarries, but it was just, I always wanted at some stage to move away, to go and experience different stuff. I don't consider myself like a like a home bird by any means, always wanted to go away and do something different, play at different places. So it was just a case of when, and we just weren't doing well. And I was like, okay, listen, I could sit and stay, and if I stay, I'm probably going to stay forever. But if not, then I'll get away. The other thing about it was I was keen to. I'd only been capped once by Ireland at the time, and I was not getting much love from the senior setup, the Ireland setup, and I thought if I'd gone and playing the Premiership, that it was going to be more of a opportunity to get back into the mix, which wasn't to be in the end, but that was the thought process behind it. So yeah, it was a mixture, yeah, of just kind of things not going very well at Ulster, just kind of a bit kind of stale there, and looking for opportunities elsewhere. So the opportunity to go to Northampton came along. Myself and Neil Best went out there, and to be honest, aside from the first year that I had in my Ulster career, Northampton was definitely the most enjoyable 4 years that I had in total.
Yeah, and yeah, like Northampton at the time, one of the top teams in England and Europe. And was there any talk like you going there? It was like a step up from where Ulster were at the time, and you're playing at the top of Europe. And was there any talk like of the Ireland camp, or because players that go abroad now, I think it's pretty much that you're not playing with Ireland, but back then, was there any?
Well, there was no set rule in saying that if you go, I mean, you think about kind of Simon Zebo, for example, like if he went away and played at Racing and he wasn't going to get involved because of that, there was almost like I don't think it was a set rule, but it was an unsaid sort of thing. There was nothing back then at the time. The only one that I can think of who was Tommy Bowe was he also left the same time as us, and he went to Ospreys, but he was more established in the Irish setup by then. He'd already played, I can't remember how many caps, but he was a kind of mainstay in the team. So no, there was nothing saying that if you went abroad that you weren't going to play or not. So that was my thinking, is that you go ahead and play in a competition, which is at the time anyway, debatable whether it still is the case or not, that is a better competition week in, week out, and you're going to get recognized more. And to that, I think I went over and played probably the best rugby that I have played. And the year we actually got to the Heineken Cup final, one against Leinster, I think in 2011, I think it was. And I think that season I probably played the best rugby I'd been playing. And I remember the Ireland return down in Australia at the end of the season. And I didn't get picked for the squad, or even the sort of the wider squad before that, to whenever they meet up. And I remember having a phone conversation with Declan Kidney at the time, and he just said to me, "Listen, we don't really watch much of the Premier League games." And I was kind of like, "Well, listen, is that not your job?
Yeah.
You don't have a huge talent pool, and we're only an hour's flight away. Sky TV is not that difficult to subscribe for. So is that not part of your job to be doing that?" And some convoluted answer was given. But anyway, that kind of was like a bit of a kick in the stones. Always the answer coming back was you're in our thinking, and you're next in line kind of thing. And then lo and behold, someone goes down and in the first game or whatever, and I'm thinking, oh, this is a good opportunity to get called. Sit by my phone, and then I get a message saying that one of the under-20s boys had been called up, and it was actually Rhys Ruddock, who's obviously gone on to have a brilliant career, But and at that stage, I was like, this isn't how it panned out to be. But c'est la vie, it was that's the way it worked, and so it kind of just, as I say, I enjoyed my time out there, but it wasn't to be that the plan was to go over there and try and get more Irish caps. I still went to some of the, not when I was in Northampton, but whenever I came back to Ulster, funnily enough, straight away I was invited down to the Irish setup and doing their camps for a year or two, and never went anywhere. I was probably kind of 31, 32, so I was maybe losing a bit of pace and things like that. But yeah, it wasn't debate at that stage anyway.
Yeah. What do you think it was in Northampton that allowed you to have like the best 4 years of your career during those 4 years?
Um, I don't know. I think it was, you're probably arguably, physically in the best shape around that kind of age. Um, the coaching was it probably suited my game a bit. I was never really a player to be, I was never lightning fast or didn't have exceptional ball skills. What I could do was, um, you know, I could defend well. I could get stuck in and I was kind of physical. I'd be durable. I could turn up every week. I could do all the kind of the very basic stuff very well, and just the coaches could rely on me to do that. So I think the coaching setup that we had at the time was very old school as well. You like Dorian West, who came from the Leicester, the old days of Leicester, whenever they won all those trophies and stuff. So I just think it fitted into the whole game plan, and also kind of life off the pitch was great. You're kind of a young single guy living in England, doing what you want to do, and then all the days off and stuff. So in terms of the enjoyment off the field, it was also great. We had a young squad there. James Downey, obviously he would have been playing centre at the time. Dylan Hartley, Chris Ashton, all these guys who were kind of young at the time, just breaking into the England squad. We used to have some great, we played a lot of rugby and trained hard, but we used to have some great weekends. We used to go down to, after a game, get the train down to London and stay down there, or go up to Manchester and all that. So life off the pitch was as good as life on the pitch.
Yeah, it's interesting. They say it's like Saris nowadays, they do a lot of those team trips and whatever, and that don't train as much. And a lot of that stuff away from the field is talked about. Like, I don't know, maybe you were so tight off the field, it could have helped on the field too.
I think it makes a difference, yeah. There's obviously a bit of a fine line, there's definitely times whenever I would have stepped across the line for sure, but you gotta, I think I still have an old school philosophy of there's no better way of kind of bonding as a team than over a few beers. So all this crap that you go 10-pin bowling, or I don't know, paint bowling or whatever. Boys just can't wait to get out of there. Really, if you have a night out with a few beers, you kind of break down those barriers, and that's how you really get to know someone. So I still have that philosophy that I think that's the best way to do it, and I think that's why Saris did so well back in those kind of years as well. So it's about kind of getting that balance right, because obviously the dangers of stepping overboard on that nowadays with all social media and the mad kind of PC world that we live in these days, you got to be very careful, unfortunately. So yeah, it's getting that balance right.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned there the durability, and I don't know, did you play 350 odd games or something professionally? What was there anything to that, or once again, you're not a winger or a scrum half, like playing number 8, playing a physical position and not picking up so many injuries?
Not really. I think a lot of it's luck, obviously. Genetics is a thing. You got to count that. Some people are just genetically more susceptible to getting injured. I think the way you play, I don't know. Some people are more kamikaze than others. I wouldn't have considered myself that style of player. I would like to get stuck in, but I probably would have been not as reckless as a lot of other players would have been. But I don't know. It's a difficult one to answer. I think I wanted to play for as long as possible. My thing always was whenever each time I wouldn't have been one for training hard at all. Whenever I was younger, yeah, but whenever I kind of got older, I was kind of just do what you have to do to get by, which is pretty par for the course for a lot of the players. But I always had it in my mind that whenever you had the opportunity to play or pull on the jersey at the weekend, that you were going to give 100%. So I wouldn't have held back then. But I don't know. I think just wanting to stay in the game as long as possible, you know. And yeah, there's got to be a certain amount of it has to be down to kind of how your the structure of how your body's made up, you know, muscular skeletal system and all that, ligaments, and some people definitely have more susceptibility to kind of injuries than other. There's no doubt about that. And also luck is a thing as well, definitely.
Yeah. And so then when you retired, you got into a startup, Tackle Smart. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so we moved out to Texas 4.5 years ago. My wife and I, and at the time we moved over with a 1.5-year-old son and I think maybe a 3 or 4-month-old daughter. And yeah, so I mean, the reason why I moved to Texas is a whole totally different story. It's completely random. There's no real purpose to it. But whenever I got there, I just finished my master's in strength and conditioning or sports science or whatever, and I started working in a facility in North Dallas called Michael Johnson Performance, which is a high performance sports unit. You know, they do everything from American football to basketball to, you know, gymnastics or to track and field athletes. And, you know, obviously, you know, being a lot of footballers there, American footballers there, you get a lot of discussions between that and rugby, you know, which is a tougher sport, you know, the comparisons. And they all think, you know, chatted to a bunch of NFL players and college players, high school, and they all think rugby players are nuts because they don't wear the helmets and the pads and everything like that. But on the flip side of that, like at least whenever we're tackling or contact's coming, we can see where it's coming from. You know, generally it's in your kind of peripheral vision, whereas in football, you know, you're getting blindsided or whatever. You know, you're not braced for the contact. So there's arguments for both. Anyway, it came to sort of the tackling. Like that's the biggest sort of similar comparison between the two sports is the tackling side of it. And I was kind of interested in how they were taught how to tackle, like currently, whether they're involved in the NFL team or growing up. And it turns out that they're not taught how to tackle at all. Like literally, I mean, not at all. Like some of the teams might be, but whenever they're taught how to tackle, it'll be the complete opposite of what you're taught in rugby. So you're taught in rugby, obviously, to get your head behind contact and cheek to cheek and all that, and not put your head in harm's way. Whereas in American football, it's complete opposite. You're taught to put your head right in front of contact, you know, bite the ball or put your head to the numbers or whatever terminology they use to try and make sure to stop that momentum as quickly as possible. But, you know, if you put your head there, that's where all the momentum, that's where all your head's going to get the momentum, the shaking around. So for me, it was a kind of like, well, what the hell? Like, you know, complete opposite of what we're taught. No wonder there's been issues with, you know, CTE and concussions and all that going on. And they all agree. They say, listen, there's a big problem in American football right now. That the numbers are decreasing. The numbers of youth players decreasing massively. They've been going down probably for the last 15 to 20 years since a lot of this information's been coming out. I think within the NFL anyway, I think 60 to 65% of players in NFL are African American. Population of America, African Americans, about 12%, and the number of white people playing football in America is about 20 to 25%, whereas the population is the transverse of that around 65, I think. So, and that's on the decline as well, especially in youth level. They're all kind of, a lot of the parents are getting more concerned about this, and they're starting to send their kids to play, you know, football or like soccer, lacrosse, baseball, a lot of non-contact sports because of this, because of the issues that they're coming up with, concussions. So they kind of said to me, you know, like, well, it'd be a great idea to try, because you come from like a background where you're taught how to tackle as a 5-6-year-old correctly without putting your head in harm's way, to start coaching at different age groups start coaching how to tackle properly, where kids aren't going to get, all these long-term issues with brain injuries and things like that. So that's really where it started. So it's been going probably three and a bit years now, and it's gaining momentum each year. Obviously, kind of COVID had its difficulties, where the schools closed and things like that. But yeah, it's got a lot of potential, and it's going pretty well.
Nice one. And so you coach in that center, and then like what different groups come through? Is that it?
So the way I do it is I coach. I do a couple of different things. I do like small group coaching. Majority of the clients that I coach are youth athletes over here, which are considered anything from kind of 8 years old to 14. All right. So the reason being is because the parents are concerned about them going from flag football, which is touch rugby basically, to full tackle, taking that step up, and also going from elementary to middle school, which is primary school, to secondary or grammar school, whatever you call it, and then also do team sessions as well. So I go and take a whole team on how to do the tackling, but also get the coaches involved in terms of giving them a lot of new drills and ideas about how they can take things forward. Because honestly, they have a program in American football called, like, a youth program called Heads Up Football, which some of it's okay, but a lot of it is just the whole principle behind it is just keeping your head up. Okay, and if you keep your head up, you're more susceptible to whiplash, and you're also more susceptible to being knocked backwards. Okay, because you don't have that kind of leverage position. So it's about trying to train to deal with, because they're very old-fashioned, old school in their way of coaching. But there's a slow cultural change on that, definitely.
Yeah. I walked down when I was in Linwood. I walked down to the football team for a bit, and I just found it wild. They used to say, "Get your head on the ball." So guys used to just run as hard as they can and get their head towards the ball. But like you say, I
Yeah.
would see lads getting sparked all the time at training. Like,
It's hard to believe. The thing about it is that because you have the shoulder pads and you have the helmets, there's a misconception that the helmets especially are going to be the thing that stops the concussion. And every time they're marketed in a way that they've got these inner, like, sort of foam or cushioning inside them to act as a shock absorber. Essentially, at the end of the day, like, helmets are great for stopping fractured skulls or broken noses or abrasions or whatever it is. But it's still, if you put your head right in front of where someone's running, you're still going to get that, the brain is basically like a yolk inside an egg, which is still going to shake inside. A helmet's not going to stop that. The only way you can stop that is actually getting your head fully out of the contacts away. So that's kind of the analogy that I put towards it. But for the most part, like, a lot of the younger coaches will get it. Older coaches still don't get it. They're kind of people don't like change, and it takes them time to kind of to be able to talk them around on that.
yeah. And another one is I was like 23 when I did it, tried it out, and playing rugby, you tackle properly. And I remember being like, oh, I'm not going to be like these idiots, the way they just have no disregard for their head. And then you put on the pads, you put on the helmet, and you just feel invincible. You're like, all right, let's go, let's smash anything I can.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, and I can understand that. Like, I mean, that's why whenever I do the coaching, I tell them not to wear any pads or not to wear helmets. You want them to feel vulnerable. You want them to feel that sense of, like, shit,
yeah.
I'm a bit kind of nervous about where I put my head here, and that means they'll make sure they concentrate on their technique. Because as soon as you tell them to put on their helmets, and I've seen it time and time again, you'll do half a session without it, and you'll tell them, okay, go and put on your helmets and shoulder pads. Bang! All of a sudden, they're just going 100 miles an hour, and they're just going no technique, and they're just back to square one. So that's why I do kind of virtually all of the training or coaching that I do is without the helmets and pads on. So that's the kind of the thought process behind it. But ultimately, you still have to do a little bit with the helmets on, because that's the way they're going to play. They have to feel comfortable by doing that. But the other thing is the big argument behind it is that, obviously football, or American football, is more of a game of finer margins in terms of like the field position that you give up. So it's more of a game of inches in terms of, first down, second downs, and all that. So I can understand why they're wanting to really close the space and sprint towards a ball carrier and stop them dead in their tracks. But you see the amount of missed tackles in football because they're literally just sprinting at them as hard as they can. Okay, and because you do that, then they're very easy to be sidestepped or juked, as they say over here. And more times than not, they'll have another missile coming in from another direction to stop them. But that's what I'm trying to get them to kind of get their heads around, is that, if you close the space, but then that last sort of 10, 15 yards, slow down a little bit, you're not really going to concede ground, but the chances of you making a tackle are going to be a lot higher than missing it.
Mm. And then as well, I see you're agent at the moment. So when you start that, was that when you went over to Texas as well?
No, I started at, we started the agency just before moving out to America, actually, probably 6 months before that. So probably going on nearly 5 years ago now. Myself and John Andres, who's my cousin, we started that. And John's pretty much run it for the last kind of 4.5 years. I stepped away from it. We helped get it set up, and I stepped away from it. And he started dealing with that back in the UK and Ireland. We also got a guy on the ground now in France who's part of our team, James Percival, who John would have played with at Harlequins. John's been involved with a lot of clubs around England, Ireland, and Scotland, and Percy in England and France, and obviously my connections too. So we're pretty well spread over. So yeah, I come back into it about 6 months ago. The thinking being that with rugby, taking off, albeit pretty slowly over in the States, but getting that World Cup in 2031, I think is a real step forward for things. So coming full time on that, and going to deal with MLR and any players who want to come here, or any players who want to go play over there. So yeah, it's for me the hands-on stuff's only really started the last 6 months or whatever, but I've been in the background for the last sort of few years anyway.
Cool. And yes, as you mentioned there, it's mainly you're like on the ground in America and helping with players, in the MLR and getting spots there.
Yeah. It's a kind of, there's players who coming to play in America is attractive as it is, not financially yet, but hopefully that will improve. You're talking about coming to apply a trade in a country which is one of the most kind of appealing country in the world to live in. So I think that's a big selling point in itself. So there's a lot of people who are playing rugby back in Ireland, UK, for example, in Ireland only has 4 provinces. There's only a number of professional contracts that can give out, but the opportunity then to come out and either study at an early age and go on and play professional out here, or else come and play professionally in MLR is a big card, rugby aside, in terms of just being able to kind of live out in America, whether that be short term or long term. I think things are progressing nicely. The MLR is now in its 5th year, going into 6th, I think. Things are slowly but surely falling into place. Fingers crossed they'll continue to go that way. But at the same time, there's also a lot of players who are playing in the MLR at the moment who also have the capacity to go and play overseas in Europe. So it's a bit of a kind of 2-pronged approach to getting players to come over here, and also getting other players to go back and get some exposure, whether it be overseas. Also, there's a lot of guys who are playing down in South America as well, who I know they have the SLAR, the league that's kicked off recently as well. So been pretty heavily involved in the unions down there, to get some of their guys to come up here. So yeah, it's and also been involved in Japan as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a it's been a busy kind of 6 months anyway, but we're making great progress anyway.
That's cool. That's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is. And the thing we kind of think is we've got very good I mean, because we have such good networks back in Europe, especially with all the kind of Premiership, top 14 Pro D2 teams, URC. We have the opportunity, other relationships with the directors of rugby to kind of place guys as well. And given kind of another sort of 6 months to a year, we'll have those fully fledged relationships over here as well. So we want to try and be spaced out as much as we can, and Japan too. Yeah, so that's the idea, is trying to make it an agency where we're not looking for huge numbers, but we want to make sure it's a player first agency. We've all, there's the guys who are involved with us. We've all had agents. Some have had, for the most part, good experiences. Some there's been one or two bad experiences. So we're trying to take the things we weren't too happy with and put those right and make sure. I think if you look at the best agents in the world, they're the ones that have the close relationships with the players. They put the player first. They don't always go with the side of the club or the team. And it's about trying to almost acting as a kind of mentor role in many ways. Not just have the self-interest of the agency at heart, but also, what's going to be best for the player, not just obviously for the rugby first, but, in terms of like, what do they do after rugby as well? Help them develop as a player, as a person, for life after rugby as well, which I think is pretty important, which is something which isn't really focused upon that much.
Yeah, for sure. And what was how'd you move over to Texas at first, or why'd you decide to make that move?
So my wife, she's a US citizen. She's originally from Brazil, so it's a long old story. But she moved to America when she was pretty much in high school. It was an exchange student, and went to Louisiana in the middle of arse end of nowhere. Hated it. Was with a family who were a bit kind of odd, and she was like, okay, get me out of here. So she moved down to Florida and set up camp there and lived there for about 10 years, I think. And then it was whenever I was at Northampton, actually. I went over, we had a week off in spring break, and myself and Callum Clark and Alex Waller went over, and just went over there for a week, a bit of partying and all that. And my wife, she was working in a bar at the time, and kind of got meeting her and did long distance for 2 years. Persuaded her somehow then to move back to Belfast whenever I was moving from Northampton back to Belfast, from Miami back to Belfast. Don't know how I did that, but she convinced her somehow to do that, and then we all went well. We got engaged, got married, had our 2 kids, and then once I retired from rugby, we wanted to. It was always the agreement that we're going to go back, or live in the States long term. Northern Ireland's a great country. It'll always be home to me anyway. And but I just think the opportunity out in America is something that was, we couldn't turn down. Texas, the reason why there, at the time it still is, and comparatively, a fairly reasonably good cost of living place. People are great. Weather's great. That was a big thing, actually, the weather wise. We wanted to go live somewhere where for the most part of the year, you get sun all year round. And you don't have to stick on, 10 layers each time you go out the house and all that. Opportunity for work as well. I think that's a big thing. There's they say America is what you make of it. If you're willing to work hard and kind of do all that, and you're ambitious, then the world is your oyster, kind of thing. So, and the schools are great for the kids. You're going to start school next year too. So that was the reason why Texas. We kind of took a plunge and moved to a place called Frisco, and then McKinney, which is besides about 30 miles north of Dallas. It's been great. Yeah, we're 5 years, or coming up 5 years. Hopefully get the citizenship this year, and it's been a good move for us.
Nice one. And so plan just stay there and keep working with Tackle Smart and the agency, and base yourself there in Frisco.
Yeah, yeah. That's the long term is to stay. We've got no plans. We just bought a house there last year, so yeah, long term is going to be out there. And as I say, yeah, the agency, I think it'll be exciting, kind of 9 years ahead, leading up to the World Cup out here. And I think Tackle Smart has a lot of potential as well. At the moment, it's pretty much me doing it full time, which obviously is time constraints wise has its difficulties, but there's a few exciting things in the pipeline. Getting involved with a couple of ex NFL players as well to try and take that to the next level too. So yeah, that's the idea as well. And the wife's business is going well, and yeah, we're all happy with the move, and yeah, we like to travel, get back and see back to Belfast as much as possible too.
That's brilliant. Well, fair play with it all, and best luck with it. And cheers for your time.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me on.